Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Ben Standig, our good friend from The Athletic, joins us. Today's top story. The Commanders have made a bunch of staff changes. We'll see how significant they are because we're going to ask Ben about it because he knows such things. Ben, first of all, hello. How are you? Happy NBA Draft Week. I know you celebrate as well.
I do. I wish it was a better establishment that we get to eat at. But hey, every draft is interesting and exciting.
That is definitely true. We're not short on excitement. That's for sure. Quality, we can discuss that later. I do actually want to pick your brain on the draft later. But for now, let's focus on your day job, not your favorite hobby, which is the Washington Commanders. They announced a whole bunch of new support staffs. They announced some people with some changing titles and roles. Eugene Shen no longer with the organization, potentially still with Harris Blitzer, but not with the Commanders. What to you, amongst all this list of changes that we received in our email inboxes, is the most important or significant to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, a lot of the changes or a lot of the announcements today were just, things we largely kind of knew. Like they officially announced the hiring of like Chris White as director of pro scouting. We already knew that was happening. A couple other title changes, some of the scouts, things like that. But the Eugene Shen situation is definitely one that is new. I wrote last week sort of a little bit of a catch-all about some things that were on my brain, and one of them had to do with the analytics department. Specifically, one that was I heard some noise about possibly Shen's future being in question, but more specifically, it was about that Adam Peters at this point has remade the whole team, right? Obviously forget the roster even, but new front office, new changes with the pro scouting, new scouts coming in. But the one area that had not been touched was analytics, and that it always seemed odd that Shen was hired before Adam Peters even got here. A couple of months before. He was hired right around the trade deadline when Washington, as we know, moved Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So it always seemed kind of weird that you would hire this guy as an executive. Like, he wasn't just sort of a rank and file staffer. He's listed as one of the senior executives in the operations department. And when they then hired Brandon Sosna to be the new senior VP of football operations, beyond contracts and salary cap management, one of Sosna's duties was overseeing the analytics department. And that seemed curious in the moment because that felt like that meant there was sort of a layer between Shen and Peters. And why would you have somebody sort of overseeing the analytics department if, in fact, Shen was kind of running that? So I don't know why they decided to make the change, but again, Peters didn't bring him in. He was already here. And just like, I guess to some degree, they moved on from Eric Stokes and Chris Poole is gone and some other things have changed. Peters decided, hey, we're going to have, I guess Shen out, and Sosna is going to, now oversee that department.
In some ways, this doesn't matter because it's old news, but I mean, the repercussions will go on for a long time. The trades that were made at the deadline last year result in Luke McCaffrey. They result in Ben Sinnott and Mike Sainristil directly for Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So we see the kind of the fruits of the labor, but what does it tell us about the way Josh Harris was thinking, that he felt, I got to bring in Eugene Shen before I hire a GM? Like, what does that tell us about Josh Harris as an owner, I guess is really the question here, Ben, to not make it completely about what happened before. But what does it tell us about Josh Harris as an owner that he made that move before hiring the GM and the timeline on which he made it?
Well, I don't think it's crazy. Like, for example, before hiring Adam Peters, what happens? He brings in Bob Myers to be an advisor, like a broad-thinking advisor, but he also brings in Rick Spielman, a former GM, to help go through the process of hiring a new GM, right? So somebody who has that experience, because Harris doesn't. Kudos to him for saying, hey, I'm not going to just sit here and say I know who to hire. So he brings in somebody to help, right? But we knew that Spielman was a short-term hire, that we knew that he was only lasting as far as the GM and the coaching hires. And Myers is here for bigger picture, but again, he's not an NFL guy. He's an NBA guy. here to help Harris just be a strategic thinker, essentially. Shen, as far as we knew, was to be a long-term play. And I think that's the difference. I think Harris recognized rightfully that as the season, was starting to, they hadn't gone on a big losing streak really at that point, but kind of everybody, I think, recognized where the season was going to go at the end, that there would be changes made. And with the trade deadline there, I suspect he wanted somebody with fresh perspective to help give him a sense of what to do, right? And, I don't know what kind of contract Shen signed, but again, the assumption was he would be here beyond just this transition. Ultimately, that's not the case. So I don't think it's a wrong decision that Harris made. It's just more like, he with Spielman, it was clear this is to help me get through this. I guess maybe he couldn't telegraph it the same because you can't say midway through the season we're transitioning at the end of the year. But I have to imagine that was a big deal. And, the day the Shen announcement was made was the day I was like, okay, they're definitely trading either Sweat or Young. It obviously was both. That to me signaled Harris understands this is about the future, not the moment. And, they obviously took some steps in that direction.
Yeah, I started the show with this, Ben. I actually think it's like a positive thing to Harris about who he is as an owner, because he realized I need more advanced thinking in the room and making sure that this whole thing gets started on the right direction, not getting the 1 degree off, if you will, at the start of the journey that causes you to entirely miss the destination, was essential. And he did that. And whether Eugene Shen was a long-term part of the plan or not, sure, he's widely regarded as one of the best minds, so there was always a chance he'd stick around. But to me, even just his hiring and the fact that he was willing to come here, considering the caliber of and grade of professional that had been working in the building in Ashburn compared to someone like Eugene Shen with his resume, to me, it's a resounding success, even if it's ending here, or now that it is ending, I guess I should say, because it's not an if, now that it is ending after, 8 months of employment.
Yeah, no, like I said, I mean, it seemed weird because, to some degree, how, the headline is Commanders fire executive after 8 months. And, that could sound pretty negative, right? Depending on how you want to look at it. But, look, I presumably, Harris, I'm sure, had his eye on Adam Peters at that point, but he can't know for sure, right? That he's going to get him, because obviously Peters was a big deal, and he doesn't know who he's going to hire. But he felt he needed somebody in real time. And like I said, was Eugene Shen the best person he could bring in? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Vinny Serrato was doing, but like that's what Dan Snyder did essentially, right? He brought in that kind of guy, and the difference was that Vinny Serrato ended up staying a long time and having a big influence on what happened. Here, they bring in a guy in Adam Peters, and he let Adam Peters make the decisions. And again, I don't know exactly that Adam Peters said, "Hey, we want Shen gone," or what happened for sure, but it seems that's the logical assumption. And look, I mean, if you're going to have Peters do everything else, it seems reasonable that he should have say in what's going to happen with these departments. I will say, another component here. So Rob Rogers, who was the guy in charge of contracts and salary cap management under Rivera, he's also staying. Now he's staying in a reduced role. He's losing the senior VP title, but staying in football operations. So he's under Sosna now. Because Sosna has so many responsibilities, I almost wonder to a degree if Rogers is there for sort of the nuts and bolts aspect of everything, while Sosna has these many duties, including the analytics department. So it's interesting to me, at least, that they sort of double up on the football ops side, but lose the person who was overseeing the analytics, which to me signals a further sign that just Shen wasn't fitting in. Whereas Rodgers, I know Peters was a big fan of what Rodgers did to help them during when they signed 20-something free agents this offseason.
Ben Standig, Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic, is with us. And now that you mentioned that, Ben, I think that's an interesting pattern with Rodgers, and Martin Mayhew stays at a reduced role as well. What do you think it says about where this organization is going, that these men are willing to, or does it say more about their options and what their stock was around the league after the last 4 years of working in the Rivera administration?
I mean, Look, it probably says something. Look, I think in the case of Mayhew, I don't think he doesn't come across to me as a guy with some massive ego, right? I mean, obviously, to take essentially a demotion in the company you work in would be, a tough deal, I think, for a lot of people to deal with. But this is professional football. He kind of, I assume, knows what the options are. Take this role that is being offered, or, go hit monster.com and see what's out there, right? In the NFL world. But in this case, obviously, he knew Peters previously. They worked together in San Francisco. Obviously, he clearly, they both must have liked each other enough to decide to stay. And, I know some people are like, oh, you got to get rid of all these people who were here before. Well, you don't really. If he's going to have a different role with, maybe a more specific angle, I think Mayhew has been typically focused on the pro side, and Hurney was the college side. That's fine. If Peters trusts him and then he's making the final say, I don't have any issue with that. And, probably same thing with Rodgers. I mean, there's only so many salary cap leads and contract negotiator spots available, right? It's kind of, I don't know if it's just like quarterback where there's only 32 of these jobs, but presumably it is something like that. So, if I think maybe it also does say something about Peters, right? That these guys are willing to stay, that Peters isn't coming in here with some big ego or big attitude. Like he is known to be a guy who people really seem to like and gravitate towards. So it does, to me at least, indicate that as well, that these two guys were willing to say, all right, I'll take the lesser title, but I like what's going on here, so I'll stick around.
Ben Standig sticking with us here on the Hoffman Show, despite his vast experience over the previous 2 years of this program. So when you look at any of the other, whether it's names or positions, because a lot of the names are not people we know necessarily, Ben, or have any kind of significant file on, but I do think some of the job titles are interesting. Is there anything else besides the Eugene Shen part of this and the analytics part of this that stood out to you as interesting and or important?
I think one that's interesting to me is Doug Williams, right? I mean, yeah. Doug Williams was one of the leading voices in the front office prior to Ron Rivera's hire. When Rivera came on board, they moved Doug Williams to, a role like an advisor to Jason Wright, but more specifically, that means out of the front office of the right. And he was not part of that group. And and I noticed that Williams, we saw Williams more with this whole Peters contingent during the offseason, and now he's listed on the website. There's like 5 executives listed on the football ops side, including Adam Peters, and one of them is now Doug Williams. So look, I don't know how much of a voice he has. Same thing with Mayhew, but that Peters is bringing in one of the legends of this organization, not just to be around to be a show pony, right? But he's actually part of the group, right? So I think that's notable. Again, I don't know what he's going to do other than maybe just be there for a sounding board for Peters. But if that's something the GM wants, then that's good. And simultaneously, again, it puts Williams back in the mix in the front office.
All right, Ben Standig with us. That's enough of your day job. Let's get to the thing you want to talk about. The NBA draft is tomorrow. Who do you want the Wizards to take?
Well, can I say I want them to trade down? Is that a
sure? You can want whatever you want, Ben. No, Will Dawkins isn't listening to any of us, so I say we just recklessly speculate.
Yeah, look, obviously a lot's been said about this draft. When people say it's a bad draft, they don't mean that there won't be anybody in this draft that emerges. It's that right now, today, it is borderline impossible, it appears, to figure out who any of those people will be. And therefore, as happened in the case in 2013, and to some degree, that in 2013, the Wizards took Otto Porter number 3, and in 2001, they took Kwame Brown first. That was another year where it was kind of unclear what was going to, who was going to be a long-term standout. But other guys came behind them. To me, this is why I would trade down. Not only is Washington, not only is there that uncertainty, but they still need a ton of help. Get as many assets as you can. And, if you can trade down in a year again where the gap between, 2 and 12, I don't know where people are putting their tiers, but I'm going to bet that it's probably not a major gap. So I'd rather move down, get picks, and go from there. Beyond that, I just think they got to take whoever they deem is the biggest upside play. if that's Alex Sarr, who's the name everyone is discussing, even though the Wizards are seem to be even quieter than the Commanders have been with some of their thoughts, that makes a lot of sense. 19, big man, plays defense, runs the court. If they think his upside is, the best out there, then that's the way I would go. How about you?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, is just take the biggest swing. The other thing that's hard is, in some ways, it's eerie how similar it is to talking about the Commanders draft stuff, where especially considering the people that we've covered throughout our careers here, and your career as a DC sports observer is longer than mine, in part because you grew up here as a fan, and I imported myself in 2015, but it's been almost 10 years at this point. We've just covered so many incompetent talent evaluators. It's really weird to go like, yeah, I kind of think this, but if Adam Peters or Will Dawkins does the other thing, I trust them. And that's a weird place to be in. So that if they trade down and play the numbers game, analytically, that feels like the right thing to do. But if Will Dawkins takes Alex Sarr, I believe it's because Will Dawkins thinks Alex Sarr is going to be really good, and I trust Will Dawkins as a scout. And I just kind of throw my hands up and be like, this is why they probably think it. We'll see if they're right. And that's a weird place to be in covering these two teams.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I think there are legit similarities in the two situations. Both GMs came in, in a case of Winger and Dawkins, came into a situation where it was not good. It was bleak, and given the go ahead by the ownership, finally Ted Leonsis relented and said, okay, you can rebuild. That their instinct was to say, okay, we're going to start over to a degree. I mean, I know it's a little bit different in the NFL. But essentially, it's like, okay, let's hit the reset button and go from there. And I, largely agreed with almost everything that Peters did. At least, I'm a process over results guy, so I liked what he did. And I think for Winger, look, same thing last year. Did I love getting Jordan Poole's contract? No, but it was in the context of they had to move Bradley Beal for something. They got what they could get. That ended up being Poole, and they hope, obviously, he's a big salary that they can maybe trade one day. I don't know when, but maybe. And and then go from there. They're trying not to sign guys to long contracts. They have a lot of cap space, so they can take on a bad deal with a pick attached if they want, and go from there. It's going to be a long way to go. I mean, unless this number 2 pick is like a real number 2 pick that we think about in most drafts, it's still going to be a while for the Wizards. But at least to this point, I've liked what they have done, hitting that reset button and not trying to, not trying to worry too much about winning tomorrow, even if that means a long season for those of us watching. But, from an organizational perspective, so far so good. So, we'll see what they do.
No, I don't disagree with that. The last thing real quick, because you brought him up, and I think this is a fascinating thing to consider that I don't think is being considered by most people, like draft types breaking this team down. I am stunned, Ben, when I read coverage, how much Tyus Jones's name comes up, considering that he's he could just walk. Of course, he's a sign and trade candidate, all that stuff, but he could just flat up not be here. Jordan Poole's gonna be here, and he averaged over 20 a game in the last 6 weeks of the season and looked like a totally new player under Brian Keefe. And just Jordan Poole, throw him to the side. He's not even talked about in most of these write-ups about the Wizards and how they're building this team. And there's only 2 or 3 guys that matter that are currently here anyway. Are you do you experience the same thing, or you just see Poole as, can they get his trade value back to, we don't have to attach draft picks to trade him and get rid of him as soon as possible? Or how do you see Poole and how his presence impacts this draft?
I would imagine that his presence, I don't think anybody's presence on the entire roster matters with what they're going to do in this draft. I mean, obviously, sure, you have some wings in Coulibaly and Denny, and if you want to view Poole as the starting point guard or whatever, sure, but you're not drafting, you're not going to pass on somebody you like for that. This isn't like if you have John Wall and Bradley Beal and then don't take another guard. So, look, I think Poole did play better, like you said. I hope he continues to improve under Brian Keefe. But that type of player, that, high confidence shooter, volume shooter, that guy just doesn't change historically. So I'd be floored if Jordan Poole had some big 180. And I know they wanted to still be aggressive and all that, but, to be a point guard for real on a team that's good, not just a team that's, bad and have to play games because there's a schedule, then, we'll see. But, yeah, I think to me the best bet is still – or the best hope has got to be he improves enough that not this year probably, but like maybe the year after that, his trade value is higher and the Wizards can then maybe move him and they start getting into that as they keep getting to that next phase of where they're at. But, look, they have to play a season this year. Somebody's going to have to score. He can do that, and if he can be effective, then that should help the younger guys as well. But, again, I just don't know if that we're going to see him change his stripes because historically that guy just doesn't – that type of player just doesn't do that.
No. But he does have value because he's averaging 20 and shooting, if he can get it a little more efficient, like that's value somewhere, just probably not as a starting point guard. Ben Standig, of course, Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic, but you've known Ben's coverage, covering everything DC sports for years, so great to chat a little Wizards as well. Ben, enjoy the offseason if the Commanders ever stop doing things and you can actually have an offseason.
Well, I'm glad they got it done this week and didn't wait until next month when I am going to try to get away for a little bit. So, hey, at least we have something to talk about, right? Perfect timing before I came on.
Yes, indeed. Appreciate it, man. Thank you. That's Ben Standig with us here on The Hoffman Show.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.